Chapter 13. Bob Treefighter. If a man is as wise as a serpent, he can afford to be as harmless as a dove. Cheyenne Indian proverb. Excuse me! Excuse me, sir! Yes, sir! Ricky had to wave on tiptoes under the dim orange street lamp where he stood. There was a line of red tape that had restricted, no access, authorized personnel only, printed at 2-foot intervals all along its length. The line was at the bottom of a dirt alley, the top of a dirt alley, and along its far side. It continued around the other side and met in the middle of the street where it made a circuit around a boxy old house that had an unfortunate paint job. There were lights on in that house, and at intervals 2 men who could have been brothers came and went. Finally one had seen Ricky. He wore a nondescript ball cap and silver aviator sunglasses that reflected flickering streetlights in the night. At length he walked out, a shadow amidst many. His garments were dark, unremarkable. As he came closer, Ricky could see that under his cap the man was hairless. Part of a grin seemed to be tugging at one side of his mouth, but he was holding it back. "Authorized personnel only," he said. "I am FBI, DC branch. So you got documentation authorizing you to interfere with us?" Just who are you? That's no concern of yours." "Well, hey, hold on. Let's get off on the right foot here. I am Ricky." "I'm not amused." He laughed, by contrast, which was confusing. "Beat it, kid. This is our jurisdiction." "Whose jurisdiction would that be, sir?" "You have trouble with English or something?" At that point, Clever Ed showed up. He had been taking a leak in a nearby alley and was still adjusting his pants. Now, mister, no need to be politically incorrect. Come on. I'm Agent Edward Fogarty. This is Agent Richard Patel. You might have heard of me. Clever Ed. No. Well, we did just come out from D.C. a number of days ago. Well, maybe even a week. We've been up and down this town that whole time. And you know, we have reason to believe the premises you're stewarding here have evidence relating to a number of connected incidents. We just need to look around. Come on, pal. We're on the same side, right? The man in the ball cap looked Clever Ed up and down, then turned his gaze back on Ricky and said, "Why don't you call up that new droopy dog U.S. Attorney General and tell him your woes, Kimosabe? How about that?" Clever Ed took green-lensed, Lenin-style glasses off and rubbed his eyes. "Come here, fella." He went to put an arm around the man's shoulders over the tape, but was rebuffed almost violently, and the man in dark clothes snapped out, "Knock it off! You two need to get out of here or I'll have you removed." Fine, just one thing. That Douglas kid, the scientist, folks are saying he was in that house I see hiding in the shadows back there." He indicated the square structure down the dirt alley. "You know, he was studying in the UK before he came here on a work-study exchange related to his field over at SAND, the Stanford Ancillary Neutrino Division. It's been over a week since that missing report was filed. All kinds of weird activity all around this spot when he disappeared. Multiple witnesses in town. They all saw him up here with a bunch of plaid or flannel fellas matching your description. Apparently there were gunshots at some point and a fracas. Old boy at the gas station in Limestone said he heard there were 4 of you. Some fellow with a nose what reminded him of a Roman statue, and 3 snickering lumberjacks, Buford, Skeeter, and Rufus, or that's the word on the street. Bit funny you think about it. I ain't heard names like that since, so I guess, that Civil War cult in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, you know any old boys like that?" The man in the ball cap spit at the dirt, and he started to snicker. "FBI people all the same, cliche and naive and cringy and dumb. You in South Dakota, bub. Every lumberjoe roundabout here's a Rufus, a Skeeter, or a Steve or something." Ricky was confused enough. He spoke up. "Lumberjoe? Is it not lumberjack?" "Sure it is, Ricky," Clever Ed said. Never heard anybody say Lumberjoe in my life. Where you boys from, anyway? Listen, these premises are closed. You know, I get authorized. I can use deadly force. For you to get authorized, the sitting U.S. Attorney General will have to live down all those trips on the Lolita Express. The media will get wind of the second he gets out of line. You think he won't put the brakes on your whole agency? You're naive. Get lost! The man was so pleased with himself, he turned at that point and started walking back down the hill. Clever Ed called after him, "Whatever you say, Skeeter, you're a real ache in my backside. Come on, Ricky." And he jostled the shoulder of the younger agent as he turned to go. They made it 3 paces before the man apparently called Skeeter could be heard making an about face on the dirt alley and heading back up the hill. He stepped carefully but quickly over the red tape that cordoned off most of a block in Trail, South Dakota. He whipped off his aviator sunglasses, walked right up to Ed, and poked him in the chest with a finger that was pale, gnarled, and arthritic. It looked like a leper's hand on a healthy man. Skeeter had a wide grin on his face as Clever Ed recoiled from the nearly black eyes that had been hidden under shades. "Go ahead, turn over stones, Edward. Keep turning, keep hunting, keep looking, keep searching, keep finding. You'll find all right. You'll find more than you ever thought you could. Come back, go ahead, force my hand and see what happens." At which point he took off the hat and bashed his bald head right into Ed's nose, causing immediate blood and nearly rendering him unconscious. With hardly a second glance, he then kicked Ricky between the legs violently and went back the way he came. Ed stumbled and had to catch a telephone pole a few feet away to avoid a fall. He wiped the blood out of his nose and spit. "Are you all right, sir?" Ricky had a higher pitch than usual in his voice, and he was walking as though doing so were very painful. Even so, he had managed to grab his gun, and he looked less than peaceful. "Holster that, kid. Remember what I said? Government people were bastards or idiots?" "Of course." "That one's both. We can go after him or his partner. We can't, not now anyway. It's like old Jerry Clower used to say. We is up a stump. For the moment." Clever Ed winced and wiped his nose again, then sniffed and blinked hard. "Come on, let's get back to the car." And they stumbled away into the night. After a moment, Ed said, "He had the chipped tooth the man in the gas station told us about. Did you see it, Ricky?" "I missed it, sir." "Well, I didn't. I took a gamble he was Skeeter. Skeeter sounds like a guy with a chipped tooth. Other one's Ruford or Bufus. Rufus Buford. I don't know. Only 2 been on that premises in the last couple of days. They're having trouble with something." "Why didn't you tell them you had been to the police station and knew the locals? They were getting suspicious." "It always pays to let them think you know less than you do. I dealt with those boys at AIC before." "AIC? Oh, what's it stand for? American Cohabitation Enforcement. You'd think, of course, there's some sort of immigration group or some sort of housing authority, or, I mean, it could be anything, couldn't it?" Ricky nodded, pulling out a key to the little sedan they had rented in Rapid City from the airport a week or so earlier. "Give me that, kid. I saw what he did to you. You shouldn't drive for a bit." "Thank you, sir." Ricky tossed him the key. They got in the car and Clever Ed started it up. Ricky screwed up his face and leaned back, trying to think of things other than the discomfort of the kick. "You think, sir," he squeaked, "you think he really has dirt on the Attorney General? If he's competent, he's got more than he needs. Bastards and idiots, Ricky." "Right. We're the idiots for doing the jobs we were put here to do." "Correct." Clever Ed pulled the sedan out on the street and headed up the main avenue. ACHE. Ache. Even the CIA gets the willies around those guys. Did you see his eyes? The man must gargle LSD for breakfast. It would explain the giggles, I suppose. You run into these guys working 411s. They're always skulking, and they got friends in high places. High places. You remember, Ricky? A lot of disappearances. Well, there's sacrifices and junk like that from all these damnable cults pulling the strings on the bastards in government running us idiots. Well, nobody even knows about AIC, 'cause they're an AIC if you'll excuse the pun, in the hams of everybody with power. 2 words, Ricky. Roswell. Sir, that is 1 word. Roswell. It is 2 syllables. Syllables is what I meant. Damn, he got me good. Clever Ed rolled down the window, made a snorkeling sound with his nose, and spit a gob of blood out, quickly rolling it back up. The cops had current info on the gray-haired fellow what lived up there, but there are gaps. I think it's time we find old Bob Treefighter and hear him out, like they said. Ricky nodded. If they are right, this Treefighter man knows all about what things were like before this region was a state. Clever Ed nodded. Yep. It is something that isn't normal. What is going on? You're right on that, too. Well, better call this Bob character. Yes, sir. And Ricky fished out his smartphone. Local law enforcement officers swore up and down that Bob Treefighter was a legitimate resource, but he lived in a strange sort of legal niche where he was his own reservation. He was a bit of a trickster, and they needed to be aware of that going in. They said it was nothing serious, but to take the man's testimony and everything he said with at least a grain of salt, maybe a couple. When Ricky called him, Bob Treefighter picked up on the first ring, but it developed that they couldn't meet with him that night, so he invited them to his ranch for lunch the following day. Bob's ranch turned out to be an old fifth-wheel camper on a hill in the middle of nowhere, stumps littering the space where they had been hewn down to clear the area. Bob Treefighter lived off-grid and had half a mind to build his own cabin on his own land, brokered under a tenuous agreement with the government concerning native sacred regions. He was far away from done. They pulled into his trailer on a weedy dirt road at about noon. It was a Tuesday. Bob Treefighter was in his late 60s, clean-shaven, slightly fat, and wearing exceptionally long white hair in a thick braid. He was not a fan of shirts. He should have been. Bob got the name Treefighter from his work as a lumberjack, but he came from a family of Lakota Sioux known for their priestly duties as medicine men in the reservation community. He was a rare breed in that he understood the plight of both sides in the present situation. This put him at odds with many throughout the reservation south of Rapid City, and constantly he was in situations of liaison between government men and tribespeople. As a result, he had many relationships with many policemen and many government bureaucrats, investigative or otherwise. He used those relationships for all they were worth. For example, FBI man Clever Ed and his sidekick Ricky were a free lunch that would only cost an afternoon story session. That was a win, and there probably wasn't too much more he could squeeze out of them realistically, so Bob had them bring lunch from Spearfish down out of the hills. There was a Mexican restaurant in town he quite favored. With an exceptional poker face, Bob was non-committal and monosyllabic until the meal was done, at which point he retrieved his peace pipe, loaded it, and took a long puff. Ricky coughed immediately, waving smoke away from where it came at him in the tight quarters of the fifth wheel. Sir, that is definitely cannabis. It sure is, said Clever Ed. Bob, come on, give us a break. This is sacred medicine, he said, helping himself to one more exceptional hit, which he let out percussively in combination with a sigh. Lakota Sioux, this was not always our land, even before the white man. Bob, I did not know that, said Ed. First, the Arikara, or so the eggheads say. I know the Cheyenne, the Crow, the Kiowa, and the Pawnee. We, the Lakota Sioux, we came in the 1800s. My grandfather's grandfather. They knew of these lands, sacred lands. They knew this is where Wildcat and Wampus Cat found each other. Clever Ed anticipated a long story, so he jumped in as Bob took another breath. I always find the legends around animals of varying tribes so fascinating. I just wanted to know, do these cats have anything to do with the House of the Hermit we asked you about over the phone? Bob was silent, but looked at Ricky, then at Clever Ed, and nodded one time significantly. Clever Ed sighed, resigned. Okay. Wildcat is a trickster, but has good hunting medicine. Wampus Cat is a lady cat, and she is fierce. But she is evil, and she is punished, and so wears the pelt of the great cats, forever roaming the hills like the Wendigo. Know this, Ed, and what is your name again? He looked at Ricky. Ricky, said Ricky. Ricky. Know this, Ed and Ricky. To understand Wampus Cat and Wildcat, you can't listen only to the Cheyenne, or the Sioux, or the Crow, or the Lakota Sioux. You must hear all the songs and add them up and push them together, and there you find your meaning. Okay, Ed replied. We're listening to your song now. I will just give you the condensed version. The full one is very long, much too long for lunch. You know of the rock in the plains, yes, you do. The Kiowa call it Tree Rock. The white man calls it Devil's Tower. We call it Mato Tapila, Bear Lodge. But we came later. We took legends and made our own. Some medicine men did. Some kept the old traditions alive. There is a rare song of Wildcat and Wampus Cat, and the sisters and the bear. It is said Wampus Cat and Wildcat found one another at Bear Lodge, but Bear would not have them, and chased them into the hills. In the hills he lost them, and became tired, and slept, and is now grown over in trees. So says the song. But how did Wildcat and Wampus Cat escape him? He so large, they so small. Wampus Cat knows how to hide. Wildcat knows how to hunt. They came into the hills. Together they found a hole in the world. Wildcat caught the scent of the way. Wampus Cat found its hidden entrance. And so they found the making place of Wakantanka, the great spirit, the great mystery. They found their way to the great teepee, where he wrote the songs of creation. Maybe more the middle world even than this place. Bob Treefighter looked around significantly, then caught their eyes again. When the great spirit discovers Wampus Cat and Wildcat, he makes them go. But Wildcat and Wampus Cat, they are clever. They pass on the knowledge of the entry to the teepee of world songs. They teach it to one of their young, the fiercest dark-haired warrior of his brothers and sister. And this became Cat, he who opens doors. The man you say lived there, what was his name again? Cigarette Charlie. Carl Marlboro, Clever Ed clarified. Bob laughed aloud. Yes, Cigarette Charlie. No one knows where he came from. That house was empty. Empty for a full generation in the boom of the town they call Trail. It was built when the gold miners came, and abandoned the same year it was made. Winter be damned. They said it was haunted. They said there were ghosts. Animals came and went in the night. They would hear them in the basement where was the furnace. But when they went to look, it was empty. They would see them in the house. Spirits coming in the night. Never at the same time. Never predictable. So they left, and the house stayed like that, the domain of Cat. It is there, they say, where the hole in the world hides. It is not the only hole. It is one. So Cat kept his little cat kingdom, for he scared away any that dared to dream there, until one day, Russians bought it. When, Bob? 30s, 40s maybe, I don't know for sure. Who did they buy it from? Here Bob laughed again. I have an auntie. Her family got the house from the city, 100 years ago. They took her family's land. They give her family a haunted old shack The Russians, they gave her grandmother a real house with the spirits gone. Enough money buys many houses clean of spirits. That's how my auntie got a good start in the world. Much better than any help from the government. The thing about those Russians, though, nobody ever saw them again. Ever since, it's just been Cigarette Charlie. But he's got all his paperwork, so. Carl Marlborough, Ricky corrected. Bob Treefighter laughed. That's what I said. Hey, Bob, thanks, said Clever Ed, and he quickly got the information for Bob's auntie. As they made their way to the sedan on the dirt road of the ranch, Clever Ed handed the address and phone number he had written to Ricky. Get in touch with her and find out who those Russians are when we get back to the hotel. Yes, sir. Is it just me, or does that old pothead story about cats remind you an awful lot of the Redwood incident we just put on the back burner? It is not just you, sir. Back at the hotel, Ricky pulled out a laptop, plugged in his phone, and immediately began looking into the information Bob Treefighter had given him. Property records were nebulous in that foregone era so many decades ago, but they were not inaccessible. Clever Ed grabbed a few things in a coat, stopping at the door of their little room. You don't speak any Russian, do you, Ricky? Of course not, sir. Yeah, I didn't think so. If you get that information before I'm back, download Russian on your little Babel dual linguist whatever app there. We are going to Russia, Clever Ed shrugged. I don't know. Probably, if we can trace the people who bought that house. We're not going to get past Ake here. Creepy Skeeter back there wasn't lying about Attorney General what's-his-name droopy dog. You know the guy. News gets to him with all that blackmail, we're worse than fired. That Skeeter creep's right, even if he is a bastard, and he knows we at the Bureau know all about that old stinker droopy. Makes you wonder what else he knows, and about who. Anyway, unless you want to get in a shootout with him and his black-eyed cronies, lose your job and maybe your life, we're at a dead end. We is up a stump. But we find the right info on that house from those Russians, well, maybe not. Yes, sir. All right, then, I'll be back. And Clever Ed took off.